I feel like when someone takes their last breath, often the celebration of their life or the ceremony or the ritual, whatever it might look for us based on our culture and beliefs and understanding of that, there's an opportunity there for us to.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Welcome to Represented, the podcast. I'm Aniki Shuru, racial equity coach for online business owners who want to be intentionally inclusive by building a business that is racially equitable. I created this podcast to normalize a conversation around racial inclusion so that fear is no longer the barrier that gets in the way of doing this work. This isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Whether you're taking your first steps or you're well-versed in the journey towards racial equity, this space is for you. So welcome home, friend. Let's get started.
From coast to coast, around the globe, we are represented.
So I've just finished talking to Jo Parker, and she's a gem. In fact, I just feel so blessed to have people like her in my life because they bring the good things about you out. This conversation has gone in a direction that is even better than what I thought it would be. In everything, literally, every question I asked Jo, everything we spoke about, inclusion came through. Inclusion just came through naturally. And what I want you to pick up from this conversation is just how Jo has been able to embody inclusion in her life. And this wasn't something that she always did. And she shares what the catalyst was. And it was a series of things happening in her life. It wasn't just that one big aha moment. It was a series of things. But she's just so generous in her knowledge. And what sparked the idea for this conversation to even take place was Jo becoming a certified celebrant, end of life celebrant for funerals. And that's something in my mid 40s, you start thinking about your life, you start reflecting like, am I doing what I was created to do? Am I living in purpose and on purpose? And the question around this whole work of celebrancy, is there room for inclusion? How can it be more inclusive, specifically when you think of different cultures and how people do end of life? I know for us back home in Kenya, funerals are so different from Western culture. And even when it comes to things like weddings, which we didn't get to talk about, but that's so different depending on the culture you come from. And so as you study to become somebody such as a celebrant, are those things being taught? Are the institutions that are certifying people, are they taking into account different racial backgrounds, cultures, and so on? This is such a rich conversation. But let me tell you who Jo is. She's not only a good friend, Johanna Parker is a confidence and public speaking coach, international speaker and space holder, end of life ceremony, funeral, celebrant, and the founder of Heart Sparks, where through a combination of heart strategy and healing, she passionately supports individuals worldwide to more deeply understand and empower their authentic voice on and off stage, to feel more connected and confident within themselves and within their communities, to engage in deeper heart-led leadership, and to align their head and their heart with more purpose, especially during life's transitions. With a decade of experience in social work, counseling, crisis response, social sector reform, and grief support prior to the birth of Heart Sparks, Jo brings the breadth of her experience as a counselor and supervisor, as well as her unwavering belief in the importance of equity and inclusivity to everything she does. Her work spans over 60 countries, and the life and leadership journeys of many thousands of connected, fueled people. Without further ado, people, here is my friend Joe Parker. Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Represented Podcast. I am so happy to have you with me here, Joe Parker. Thank you so much for saying yes.
Thank you for having me, Annie. It is so wonderful to be in this space with you.
Yes, we were talking just before I press record that we haven't been in spaces or a space like this before where it's just the two of us. We're normally surrounded by our friends in our community. It's normally busy and we actually don't get time to just sit down and catch up. And it's just always been busy, but this is so lovely to do this with you.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'm so grateful that we've been able to do this in this way.
hmm Now, when I think of you, Joe, there's um, there's a way you just make somebody feel comfortable in your presence. I don't know if it is because of the work you've done in social work. I don't know if it is perhaps the fact that you are a space holder and that comes through. But every time we've been together, the eye contact you give me, your presence, your attention. I remember I was keynoting in Hobart. And you were just so present to my needs and just everything in that day. And you were the master of ceremony, MC. Is it something that you intentionally do, or is it just you being authentically you? That's a word that you use that describes your values as well, authenticity. Where does this come from? Because I can tell you deeply from my heart, it's not something that is usual.
Mm, Gosh, Annie, what a beautiful and powerful question. And thank you for seeing me and mirroring that side of me back to me, my friend. Uh, I'm not even fully sure how to answer that question. And so I'm just going to share what comes to my heart with it.
Of course.
There's no there's no intention or consciousness or formula per se in relation to how I sit with people. There absolutely, if I'm sitting down as a coach to support a client or as a
Mhm.
speaker on stage to support an audience, there's a consciousness around how I'm choosing to show up in regards to what I'm asking or sharing or saying. But the only thing here that feels so true to me is that in my lifetime, I feel like there's been no greater honor than to have the opportunity to truly be in space with people, anyone in any situation. I think there's something so special and just expansive about any two humans getting to connect as humans. And there is a level of trust and openness and giving and receiving that comes from two people sitting together, whether it's as a speaker and an audience member or as two people to share a meal, which is one of my favorite things to do, or just sitting at a bus stop waiting for a bus. And so anytime where that opportunity presents itself, I see it as a gift. And I if I can come to the end of my lifetime and have been in spaces with those gifts more time than anything else, I will be such a happy woman. And so I truly want to know you, everyone, always.
Wow.
I want to share stories because I feel like that's where we bring the richness of life and learning for ourselves. I want to know what's on your heart always. And that has been with me for as long as I can remember.
Wow, that is so beautiful. And I want you to tell us how you arrived at uh, doing the work that you do. Is it something that you saw yourself always wanting to do, or was it something you stumbled over and went like, "Ah, I can't believe this exists and I can pursue this line of work?"
Yeah, a bit of both, a bit of both. I always knew from a very young age that I wanted to work with people because of that connection piece that I shared just before. And I feel like all of us are wandering around in the world looking to connect and be seen and to see as well. And so that's always been important to me. But social work itself, as a starting point for me in my career, came about in no obvious way. I thought I wanted to be a journalist and to amplify important stories in the world that weren't being shared or weren't having the platform to be shared. But very quickly, I learned, particularly through the lens of what the journalism world looked like still now, but very much so in the 90s and early 2000s, that I wasn't, I believed, cutthroat enough for it. And so this idea of being an investigative reporter quickly went to the wayside. And instead, I came to understand the joy of being able to sit beside humans as humans in big times of transition or of challenge or of opportunity too. And so I went into a social work degree after high school, not fully knowing if I wanted to be a social worker, a youth worker, or a psychologist. And I kept my options open in that. But I very quickly fell in love with youth work specifically, and in particular, being able to do outreach work where we weren't expecting young people to come into an organization which was more likely than not running through a white supremacy lens in a Western culture norm, and tell young people how it was that they were meant to be supporting themselves and what we thought we needed, but more so the opportunity to be out on the streets 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, whenever it was that a young person would reach out, and to be beside them in their experience of what life looked like in those settings, so that instead we could be a sacred witness to their own opportunity to understand what it was what they needed, and to be responsive of that, to find these small pockets where a young person might be contemplating what more there could be for them, often in environments and settings that were so foreign to them, and being able to then almost grow that curiosity from there. And so, following university, I started working in Melbourne here, largely on the streets, foot patrol style, and providing crisis outreach, intervention, and support for young people who were homeless or street frequenting. And I came to understand so much more about my own upbringing. I grew up in such a small country town that was very sheltered and was very centered as a white young person in that community. And so I felt like through doing this work where I was showing up to be a support to others, I was instantly having my own need for greater education mirrored back to me. And so through then that pathway, it made me more curious about what else there might be for me in that line of work. And I remember very, very vividly a time when, about a decade into my career as a street outreach worker and having done some work as a drug and alcohol counsellor and a lot of other things around the edges, I found myself sitting back feeling so incredibly overwhelmed at the need for the work that I was doing, the hours that I was working, my own confusion around whether or not I was even providing a service that was of any use, because I felt like I still had so much to learn and to unpack for myself, and feeling that, gosh, Western culture pull to be climbing a corporate ladder when that wasn't something that interested me at all. And my head just felt like it was not going to be able to hold it all for much longer. And I reached out to a very dear friend of mine who had not too long ago become a coach by the name of Johanna Parker, who we both know.
Yes.
And engaged her as a coach for myself without fully knowing what coaching was, but knowing that it was something I wanted to explore for myself to support myself. And through the process of working with Julie, I fell in love with coaching, and it provided an opportunity to take everything that I felt I knew from my social work roles and being able to show up in times when people were ready and willing to be in conversation about support, and also continue to show up in that way through the lens of allowing other people to be the experts in their own life and experience, which was something I felt the social work sector was still struggling to give people the
Yeah.
ability to do.
Yeah. Oh, what a beautiful backstory. I didn't know all of that. And as I'm listening to this, Joe, I think what a gift coaching is, because even as
Mm.
I speak to people from back home in Kenya and I describe what life coaching is and holding that space, they're always like, I didn't know that existed, or I need that. We need more of that. And I just wish that there was a way that this work was more accessible as
Yes.
you've shared, because it's something that we as coaches, as space holders, have benefited tremendously from. And from there, then gone ahead and answered the call into it. And I think that in some ways you may have answered my next question, Joe, but if you didn't, you might see perhaps the gap of where to bring it all together. Because I'm curious to know how you arrived at this work in terms of inclusion and your commitment to it. As I was doing some research, going through your website and your social media. What was very clear to me, and particularly on your website, was your commitment to DEI. And it's not just from your statement, because a lot of people, that's where you'll go to and that's where you'll find that information. But it was sprinkled throughout your messaging. You talk about how important equity and inclusion is. Was there a particular catalyst that led you to center this work?
Mm. I think there was a number of very key moments that led me to center this work. And I wish beyond wishes that I had centered this work earlier than I had. I wish beyond wishes that there hadn't needed to be a number of moments for me to suddenly like wake up to myself and see the white supremacy that I was living in, the systems of oppression that were centering me separate to others, the need for me to be looking at my privilege and my internal racism and really working from that place. And the reality is that it took many moments. Part of that was understanding that my upbringing was very white and very sheltered. I grew up in a small country farming town where we had a very white community, and was almost tricking myself to thinking that because my family hosted many exchange students from all over the world as I was growing up, I was inclusive. That is not the case, as we know. And it took me a long time to understand that there were so many things that these incredible friends, young people I was working with on the streets in Melbourne as a social worker, community members when I moved to Melbourne full time, were thinking about every single day of their lives, 24 hours a day, that I was not needing to
Yeah.
think about. And so it was often, and it's been one of the greatest gifts of my life, when I would be sitting by the river in the middle of the night with a young person who was talking to me about their experience of racism from that day, or their experience of feeling so displaced from the rest of their family in a beautiful place on the other side of the world that they couldn't access in that moment, when I was struck by the knowledge of, oh heck, like I'm not thinking about that every day. I'm not, that this is not on my radar. And yet here I am as a white woman, social worker, in a position of power to be able to so-called help you, not even fully aware of what your challenges are, let alone what I can do in that space to see and amplify your needs in this situation. And so for me, a mixture of understanding the shelter of my upbringing, understanding the reality of my community members, and also then knowing that there was so much work for me to do to show up as the person, let alone the support person I wanted to be in the world. I got to work, and I still, right, Annie, this lifelong work, I still am doing the work because there are so many systems that have taught me to believe that I'm seeing a full picture of many things when in fact we know I am not. And constantly I'm still uncovering things that I've not previously seen for myself before. And so back to work I go. I think for me, the key here, though, isn't so much about awareness, but it's about action. And it isn't even about, for me, a DEI statement on my website. It's around then the operationalization of that statement. Like, what does that look like in practice? But also, rather than just putting some actions in place and trusting that that's doing the work, like, how are we receiving feedback, understanding how to deepen the work, understanding where we're letting ourselves down, where we're letting other people down, and consistently shaping, changing, evolving, growing as we all do together in time. And so through that, I'm just so grateful for many incredible teachers and mentors, including yourself, who have been so open and willing to hold and guide me through that process as I've worked hard to hold and guide myself too.
Wow, Joe, that is such a powerful reflection, going back and putting yourself in that position of when awareness hit you. And now, it's not just awareness, but it's the action that goes behind that. It's more than a statement, an inclusion statement. It's the action. It's what you embody. And it is lifelong work. Uh, and you get that. And that is something that I've been talking about for the last few weeks as I've been launching my program, represented for the 12th time now, which kind of feels unreal, but at the same time, it feels like it's just the other day when we started with a pilot group, of which I believe you were a part of,
I
Joe.
was.
And so just to see the way you're articulating and your level of understanding, that is rare because so many people, by virtue of the fact that they're aware, I know that this is the problem. There's that belief that because I know, then I am inclusive. Because I know, then I am this person who welcomes and loves and is kind to everybody. But that is not the case. And that is where there's a huge gap in a misconception, a misunderstanding, that I try and dig into every day in my work to try and bring about that understanding and that aha moment of, yes, you're aware, but that doesn't, it's not synonymous with being inclusive. And I love how you've been able to articulate that, and it shows the commitment and the work you've done over, the years and learning from different people, which brings me to the question of, and particularly you being a life coach trainer, lead trainer for Beautiful You Coaching Academy. You are one of my trainers. And there's a way you hold space, there's a way you call people in and up that is just, you're skilled at it. You really are. And I hope to get to a level where I come close to how you're able to do that. And as I was reflecting on this question, Joe, which is around how different people learn, how different people are able to take on concepts, and specifically speaking to those who come from racially diverse backgrounds, because you're holding space from people all from all different backgrounds. What are some of the differences that you see when it comes to how we show up, how we engage with material? Because I can certainly say for me, I see it very clearly, and that's because I hold that identity. I can tell when people are holding back. I can tell when people are leaning in. I can tell when people are engaged, when they're not. I can sense the power dynamics and the energy, something that we quickly are able to intercept, but may not be so for somebody who this work is not something that they're familiar with. But I'm so curious to know, as somebody who holds that space and who leads in this kind of training, are there any differences that you see?
Yeah, there really are. And, I'm always so hesitant to speak too much in absolutes or even,
Of course.
categories, right? Because
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
everyone's learning experience is also very unique. But there are definitely differences that I see here. I think often learning environments, and having recently been in a learning environment myself, sometimes content is so fast, right? Content is so fast and it doesn't always allow the opportunity for things like expansion on said content, processing, exploring, delving deeper, opportunities to share and reflect stories and experiences and understanding. Often, Western learning environments are structured in a way where everything moves so quickly because it's about imparting knowledge and coming to an outcome. That is the exact opposite of how so many people love to receive knowledge. Like
Mhm.
learning can also look like nothing other than yarning, than sharing stories, than exploring concepts through action, through co-creation physically and or emotionally in the way that we show up for anything from making a meal together to building a program together.
Mhm.
And so I think when space holding is more inclusive, it offers opportunities for spaciousness around content so that it can be explored in many ways. I think there's also a really important piece here around language
Mhm.
and how we communicate in any learning environment. Language in relation to oppression and ableist language that might be used, and also language that is inclusive from understanding people's different experiences with language, people's different awareness of language. In an
Yes.
environment like Beautiful You, we have so many students where the English language is second, third, fourth, fifth language. And to be constantly showing up to a learning environment where we're not only trying to learn new concepts and models, but we're translating things multiple times back and forth in our mind, it's exhausting. And so to be in that head, heart, present connection is really challenging
Mhm.
for a lot of people, as you know. And so being able to allow space to reflect that too, with time to check understanding, explore different ways for language to be used, and to continue from there is important. And also, I think most importantly, allowing spaciousness for individuals to have an opportunity always to talk about what learning has worked for them, what learning environments look like, if they're even viewed as learning environments, because sometimes they're not, right? And to be able to explore different ways that we can co-create learning spaces so that
Mhm.
they bring about an opportunity for everyone to feel as though they're creating the environment for learning, not just teacher imparting knowledge onto student per se. The challenge, of course, Annie, for in particular many like long-term existing education environments in Australia that aren't doing inclusion work
Mhm.
is that they're still running on very, very, very Western culture
Mhm.
models that are based on power dynamics and exclusivity and aren't allowing consideration for any of that or more. I feel like my response to that question has just touched the tip of the iceberg of what I see and what's needed here. But they're the things that immediately come to mind.
Mm. As you're reflecting there, it makes me actually begin to realize how many barriers, people who come from different racially diverse backgrounds have to go through
Mm,
because we're in environments that are not typically made with us in mind. And so we've got
right.
to adapt, we've got to learn those systems, and then see how we can not only understand them but also succeed within those systems because it's a way of survival. And so there are barriers, but we I don't know, we've grown a kind of second, third, fourth skin where you just learn how to roll with it and how you show up. And I think it's so interesting as a space holder to see, to acknowledge, to know that, so that you're able to temper or change the ways in which one is able to support certain, particularly in one-to-one situations where you have a client and you're like, I know what their goal is or what they're hoping to get out of here. How can I better support them? And this is what I'm always kind of talking about with online business owners, coaches, course creators. There's a way in which you need to hold space that allows people to come through with you and with your support to potentially reach their goals. Because if they don't have that, the chances of success are less and less. And I remember being a trainee with the academy, and it's because there were different things that were part of the education system that allowed me to succeed. And the one thing that really sticks out for me is the permission to just be me, permission
Yes.
to just be me and not feel like I needed to feel ashamed about that or feel less than about that or feel like it's something that needed to be hidden and I needed to bring my other persona because as people who have, marginalized identities, we do have different personas that help us, survive in different environments and to just come as you are. And it was always a question until the end, like, is it safe? Is it okay? Can I, oh my goodness, it
Mm.
happened to me. Like I'm still okay. And I showed up as a little bit of Annie, the real me, and I'm still okay. And that's a rare thing. That is such a rare thing.
Thank you for reflecting that, Annie. I'm so grateful that you have. And to hear you say at the end of that experience, you were feeling as though you'd allowed a bit of Annie to show up and you could see that you had and you were okay, also just speaks volumes to the way that you have supported yourself to be in that space, right? Because as a training team anywhere, we can do any number of things to hold a space. It actually doesn't mean anything in relation to what safety is for you, because only you, right? You get to decide, as we all do, what is and isn't safe for us. And something else that came to mind for me when you were sharing that was the importance of all of us. And this is something I have to continuously check myself with in many
Mhm.
environments, to step outside of the fragility that comes with wanting to do a good job and this conditioning through a white lens of what a good educator even looks like in
Yeah.
regards to how they show up or don't show up or what they're doing or not doing, because there is so much white supremacy, right, in the power imbalance that comes with being teacher and student, and then the way that we've all been conditioned here in many different ways to need to supposedly show up to meet that idea. And so it comes with being willing, for me at least, to be messy and to get it wrong
Abs-
and to have that reflected back to me and hold it and to be responsible for my own fragility so that then
All
I
that.
can do better and be better. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you get it through and through. And that comes from years and years of being immersed in this work. It's clearly not something you've done once and, gone like, yeah, tick, tick, I've gotten certified in this area. And so I'm good. This is clearly, as a conversation evolves, I'm feeling this is work that is clearly deeply work that's embodied in you. And speaking of certification, you've recently become a certified end of life celebrant. Now, Joe, for many people, that's not a role they've thought much about. What drew you to celebrancy?
Mm. Gosh, Annie, it again was a
Mhm.
number of moments. Firstly, growing up in a very small country town, isn't it interesting how often things come back to our childhood in
They
a
do.
community in a community where Everyone knew each other. I found myself, even as a young person, attending a lot of funerals. And often in those environments, things were ran in a particular order, in a particular way, and I could almost like watching a news bulletin. I knew when the eulogy was going to come. I knew that there'd be two readings that were scattered here and here, and that wasn't in any way a failing of anyone, but it felt like there had been a level of conditioning on how end of life spaces and ceremonies in that community were going to look. Then, when I was 17, I tragically lost my best friend very suddenly and was with her when she passed. And in the grieving period for me after that, I often felt like her life and my grief were held almost separate to each other at times. And I'm still not sure if that was my doing or that was just the way things played out, but it started making me curious about how, particularly at end of life, we could be holding those things closer together and holding better connection and space for those things to coexist in unison rather than as someone's end of life service that needed to be supported and then someone who needed help with their grief separate to that. Mm-hmm. Then more recently, a couple of years ago, we lost my father-in-law. And because I do a lot of work as a public speaker, I was asked to officiate his funeral, which felt like the greatest gift from my mother-in-law and my husband. Mm-hmm. And when we were planning that service, there was also, I felt this level of conditioning that had happened where then we were talking about, okay, so we need two readings, one for here and one for here. And it made me realize again that so much work that I'd been doing in exploring what it meant for all of us to be held in our authenticity and have our own beliefs, culture amplified in any spaces that we step into was held separate to end of life. I feel like when someone takes their last breath, often the celebration of their life or the ceremony or the ritual, whatever it might look for us based on our culture and beliefs and understanding of that, there's an opportunity there for us to reflect more, to step outside of the confines of how we believe things should look and instead say, well, what could this actually mean? And so I became more curious about what it might look like to step into the world of celebrancy and end-of-life celebrancy as a space holder, as a coach, as someone who is wildly obsessed with the best questions, and also what it might look like to explore that work through the lens of inclusivity too, because I feel that even Western ceremonies are amplified here. And funeral spaces as well are often designed to meet the needs of Western ceremonies, which is like such a small part of the population, right? And so at a time when we can be our most vulnerable, celebratory, grieving, whatever it might look like, at a time when individuals are longing to honor and to care for those that have passed while also connecting with community, it felt like a privilege to suddenly be able to explore what it might mean to be more inclusive in those spaces, to allow for ritual and ceremony to take part because it had meaning as opposed to because that's how it was supposed to be done. And for all of us to have an opportunity to feel more connected and come together as community, supported in spaces that would allow for that to happen. And so now this next incarnation of my work, which is an extension of what I'm doing, is around exploring how as a celebrant I can hold space, support space, amplify voices, and also know when to get the heck out of the way and just be an advocate for other people too. That's beginning in end of life ceremonies now, and hopefully also over time will extend into other life transitions as hopefully eventually a Commonwealth registered marriage celebrant too.
You know, as I think about all this and everything you're sharing, it's so well fitted and suited to you and what you do, that the human that you are. I honestly cannot think of anyone better suited that I know to do what you're pursuing. It's just so Joe. And where where I go and grab my coffee most mornings, I have to pass through a cemetery. And when I was little and we would pass through cemeteries, it always felt a little bit eerie. It felt like, oh, you know.
Mm.
But for some reason now, as somebody in their mid 40s, I often take that opportunity to reflect on my life and say, am I truly living my life with purpose? Am I giving it everything I should? Am I really, really, really honoring the reason why I'm here? And so for me, I look at it very differently. And this is even the reason why I felt I want to have this conversation with you, because end of life is something that we often don't talk about, and especially those ceremonies and how they are conducted. For me, I've always felt like my time came, uh, it would be how do we get my body back home? Because that's the only way it can be done. But it wasn't until speaking with you, a few weeks ago that I was like, it's possible that this could be a resting place. This could be a place where this could happen because there is somebody who could conduct a ceremony in a way that is sees the person or knows the person and has the ability to hold the different things that this person is. All of this to say, Joe, how do you see the work of inclusion when it comes to celebrancy work, end of life ceremonies? How is there room for it? And especially when you were studying, what was the narratives that were coming through? Was there room for different cultural perspectives?
Absolutely. Yes and yes. Annie is the quickest answer to this question. Absolutely, there is room for inclusion in this work. And of course, there is room for inclusion everywhere, right? In celebrancy, in particular, when we're looking at end of life ceremonies, it feels so deeply important because we are talking about periods where people are at their most vulnerable,
Mm,
potentially, or in their deepest grief, or at their highest celebration, or needing more than ever to feel genuinely connected to community. But this work is important everywhere. The course specifically, and anyone considering training to be a celebrant, some of the things that were really important to me when I was exploring learning institutions were first and foremost, where am I seeing representation in the content? Is there, when we're talking about case studies, are those case studies representative of many cultures
yeah.
and identities? Where is that showing up? Is the content exploring an openness to individuals creating their own ceremonies supported by a celebrant, rather than that old narrative I'd had around ceremonies needing to look a particular way? When we're talking about resources, is there explanation and exploration here around resources in other language, in other cultures, different readings, songs, etc.? And so all of that was on my mind. I was also thinking a lot about the practical tools and operationalization of what it meant to be inclusive. And so I was exploring course opportunities that made it very clear that there would be consideration of inclusion in practice, not just in theory. And finally, the trainers. I got on a call with a trainer from the course that I ended up studying with and spoke to her in depth about a few things, but I was also looking to see whether or not I felt like she was aware of her privilege. She was aware of this work. She was actively stepping up with responsibility in relation to that. And so that was the trifecta for the learning environment for me. When it comes to celebrancy work as an end of life celebrant, though, I do feel like a course is the beginning, right? It's not the end of that work. And so, yes, there is so much room for inclusion in end of life ceremonies relating to everything from physical location and how accessible they actually are, to what it looks like to be putting an end of life ceremony together, and how communities are supported to reflect what's purposeful and meaningful for them, as opposed to what the Western world suggests an end of life ceremony should include. Understanding what end of life and death means to the person who we've lost and to their loved ones, and ensuring that that's reflected in everything. And representation, even representation in different environments, learning opportunities, but also in cemeteries. Like, are grave sites there representative of different cultures and what's important there? Are there opportunities and discussions and options for that in the process? And how much are people being met where they are in their grief, and what opportunities are there to explore a greater connection between the individuals that are grieving and those that have passed, as opposed to them feeling like they're only witnessing a ceremony as such, because it's so important for so many cultures to be an active participant in ceremony, not just a witness or a bystander. And so it's really important for the industry to be exploring all of that consistently too, as it is in many ways. And as we know, there is always more work to be done.
Yeah, there is. And what has stayed with me with what you've shared there, Jo, is the work you did to see if this pathway, if this institution was right for you. It's not just something you read and you're like, well, this is all that's available, I'll just go with them. The way in which you've centered inclusion, and I come back to the embodiment of it, is that there are certain things that you have to do. There's due diligence. You're not just signing up to anything. You are making sure, okay, what lens will I be learning through? The people who are training me, what are they aware of their privileges and whatever else exists for them as individuals. Like, you're doing the extra work, you're going the extra mile, and that's inclusion in action. We were talking about awareness, and I think what you've shared there is action. This is what it looks like, inclusion every day in different aspects. That's taking action. So for you listening and you're like, how do I bring inclusion into my life? That process is an action. And I wonder, Jo, you've spent obviously many, many years as a coach, a trainer, and a speaker as well. Is there a particular lesson from this whole learning and becoming a celebrant that has shifted the way you now hold space for other roles? Is there any particular lesson that comes to mind?
Yeah, there are two, Annie. And the first one isn't actually from the celebrancy space. It's something that you taught me. It's been the greatest lesson I've received in DEI and or inclusion work ever in my lifetime. And I'm going to come back to that because it's very important. Just my heart swelled when you asked that question. In relation to celebrancy work specifically, and thinking about end of life celebrancy here, the greatest lesson I've learnt through this process is, and it's not a new lesson, but it's been so affirmed, is the importance of sitting in space physically with other humans and allowing time and messiness and humanness to exist, whether it's directly after someone has passed and sitting down with their loved ones to just chat, listen, explore, plan, but first and foremost, share and hear stories, or having the consciousness to also sit with ourselves quietly before entering those spaces, to know that we have ourselves and can hold ourselves when showing up in support for others, so that we're not in any way centering ourselves in that process. That lesson around the importance of space, stillness, togetherness, connection has been amplified even more so for me through the experience of doing this course, even in the camaraderie of fellow students, and understanding that as lifelong learners, we're in this together too. The other thing though, Annie, that jumped out at me so quickly was one of the key lessons that I got from you way back when I was in that pilot round of Represented, which is such an amazing program. And it was something that you taught me that through working with lots of teachers and mentors over the years, I'd never had reflected to me in language and was never able to understand. And it's the difference between calling someone out and calling someone in. And I gave myself a silent little hug earlier when you mentioned that you see me calling people in well as a space holder, because for me, that is all I would ever wish to master in my life, is to work towards that. But you were able to so clearly showcase to me the difference between calling people out and what that does for defensiveness, fragility, all of the things that get in the way of people taking action when it comes to inclusion work, versus allowing people to be called up to more, to see more, to do more, to be higher than the current version of themselves. And while that lesson didn't come from Celebrancy, it came from you. It continues to influence everything that I do, including now what I'm doing as an officiator of end of life ceremonies. It's always about how we can call ourselves higher for the inclusion and also the liberation of all of us, regardless of the life transition that we're in.
Mm. Ooh, shall we end right there on that? That is, well, thank you. Thank you so much for saying that. I have to say the whole calling in aspect, that is the biggest takeaway from participants. Over 100 people have come through the program. And that by far is the biggest aha, that like, you mean I don't need to be this particular way in order to have this conversation? You mean I can call people in and not call them out? I thought that was the prerequisite of being an ally, that I need to call people out. There's so many misconceptions. And so that calling in resonates with so many other space holders. So thank you for saying that. Gonna slightly switch gears as we get to the end, Joe. And it's in regards to the collaboration with you and Julie, TEDx Cecil Street in Melbourne. I've had so many wonderful reviews when it comes to how inclusive the space is and the lengths at which you have both taken to ensure as many people feel as seen, as welcome, and deserving to be there, particularly those who are participating, the speakers. Could you share some of those things that are not the norm, that you have both taken that extra step to ensure a level of inclusivity?
Mm. Oh, Annie, I feel like you and I could talk for another hour on this alone. As a speaker and speaker coach, part of the central work for me in all spaces is around deconditioning the power imbalance and whiteness in the speaking industry overall. In relation to TEDx Cecil Street, it's a great joy for Julie and I to create that in our way, on our terms, so that we can focus inclusion work there, because no, it's a space that we get to control in essence with that work. For us, it is absolutely crucial that that stage and any one of our events be representative of our community, of all of us, right? We are so sick of seeing speaker lineups on stages anywhere that very much focus on white, able-bodied, cisgendered folks. Like, we get enough airtime. I'm one of them. We get enough airtime here. And so it's really important to us that TEDx Cecil Street is representative of our community. It's also important to us that TEDx Cecil Street is representative of ideas worth sharing that are, and I say ideas worth sharing because that's the TED and TEDx catchphrase, that's the tagline, right? That are not dependent on anyone's number of social media followers or supposed status or CV or resume or any other like Western cultural ideas around what success looks like. But there's enough of that in the world. And so what we know to be true about that space is that the very best ideas that exist out there in the community are often the ones that haven't been spruiked from the rooftops in a range of different ways or manipulated, as often has to be the case, right? To be able to hold up in white systems. And so for us, it's important to keep the purity of that as much as possible when we support our speakers to come to the TEDx stage so that everyone can feel their fully authentic, expressed self in that way. That doesn't mean that there aren't systems here, because there are absolutely still licensing rules and regulations with TEDx, as there are with all places. Yeah. And there's an opportunity for us all to co-create so much together there. That also looks like, a lot of in-person one-on-one support for every one of our speakers around what they identify as important to them. It looks like universal, accessible speaker training with me and so many other things. But again, Annie, I feel like I could talk about this for another hour on its own.
I get you. And the thing with when you embody this work of inclusion, it's no longer a tick box exercise. It's no longer something that you do for other people's approval. It's something that is so much your value system that whether people like it or not, this is how things are rolling. And that's when you know that inclusion is for real, because it's not just in, oh, I see it in this pocket of where you work, but I don't see it here. It kind of touches every aspect of who you are. It's not just for the public facing, it actually touches different parts of who you are. And that is what true inclusion is. And as we've spoken of the different areas and the different lenses with which you come in through, we're seeing inclusion just shining through in every area. And I know this is lifelong work. It's not something that you get right. And it's always, look, I'm the shining example. But it's beautiful to see that reflected. And especially for somebody with a marginalized identity, for us, it's always a wow moment. It's always like, oh, you did that. Like, how courageous of you, or that's not the norm for us. So for me, I am sometimes surprised and go like, yeah, more of that, please. Not that one needs applause or anything like that, but it's so rare that for us, it's like a wow moment. And so I can see how that's been reflected as we've had this conversation throughout the different areas of your career. And now just to bring it to a close, Joe, if you didn't have to worry about pushback, misunderstanding, what's one truth about inclusion, racial inclusion specifically, you'd most want to say out loud in our industry right now?
That for those of us that have systems that center us, hey there, fellow white folk, we're all racist. Whether we know it or not, it's there. It may not be there in the ways that we're so traditionally taught to view racism. It may not be there in ways that are overtly obvious or harmful, but there'll be something. There'll be something hiding in there, not because we've set out to be, but because we exist in environments and systems that still teach us to be. That's it. If we can start from that and get really curious in looking for where that might be hiding within us, knowing that awareness is the first step, not the last one, what could we do? My goodness.
Oh, wow. Okay. For listeners who are coaches, course creators, or business owners, what's one practical thing they can do, Joe? Today they've listened to this, they feel a little fired up. They're like, okay, what's one thing that they can do to make their spaces more genuinely inclusive?
Firstly, grow that fire. Don't let it burn out. This is not a moment after listening to a conversation. This is the beginning of a blaze. So tend to it, fuel it, let it grow. And the best advice I have is to look for amazing mentors, trainers, teachers, supporters, such as yourself, Annie, who can provide support, teaching, and guidance on this journey. Part of the challenge, I think, for those of us that benefit from these systems is that we don't know what we don't know,
Right.
because we're not taught to look for it. And so we need mirrors, and we can't get those mirrors from within ourselves. Like, even listening back to this conversation and actioning everything that we've spoken about, like that's not all of it. Like, there is still so much that I know I can't see about myself and are working to uncover. And so, yes, one tip: look for teachers, look for mentors, look for people who can hold space for you as you start to deepen this. Represented was a beautiful place for me to do that. And I know that there will be so many for others too.
For sure. Jo, where can people find you? Where can they go tripping over themselves to find you online?
They can find me at heartsparks.com.au.
Beautiful. Before we end, I want to say this. I want to say thank you. Thank you for the human that you are. Thank you for the ways in which you have made me feel in your presence. You are one of the very rare people, and I haven't reflected in this way. It's just through this conversation that I've been reflecting and just things coming through for me. You're one of the rare people who, when I am in your presence, I forget my identity. I forget that I'm a Black woman. I just know I'm just a human in space. There is no hierarchy. There is no feeling of being othered. There is no feeling of like I need to prove myself. It's just a safe space. And for that, thank you, Jo.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Why don't you go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave a review so this podcast can reach more online business owners, and together we can begin to normalize racial inclusion in the online coaching space. I'd love to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where this podcast episode was recorded, the Wiradjuri people in central New South Wales, Australia. Music produced in Nairobi, Kenya by Patrick St. P. Mbaru and Kambua Mathu. Vocals by Joanne Matata.
Represented from coast to coast.